Honestly unbalanced.
I've just realised you were from Durham Uni, not from Durham Uni. You went to Durham Uni, you weren't born there. Ditto, likewise. And,
Really?
yeah, and look at us doing our weird hippie things. Yeah, I did
Love that.
law. I ended up doing law at Durham, at Van Mildert College. Where
Very
were you?
nice. I was St Mary's doing
Oh,
economics.
small. Okay, you and the guy, slightly weird people at St. Mary's. It was
I'm sure my good mates who I'm still in touch with be delighted to hear that. But yeah, they are weird. They're weirdos for sure.
it is the smallest. It's the smallest college. Did you have so what were the career expectations? Because we've both, I imagine, ended up doing careers that we didn't think we'd end up doing. I was
Mm,
supposed to be a lawyer in a big firm, but ended up actually spending most of my time at uni doing charity work and boxing with
nice.
a little bit of law on the side. What were you supposed to do?
Finance is the simple answer. So I was economics degree. Really enjoyed, interestingly, enjoyed economics A level, hated my degree. Spent most of my time playing rugby at Durham. And my dad still works in finance, lifelong kind of career in finance. And I was very blinkered and sort of that felt like the obvious path. I was like, well, I like economics. So go to a good uni, get a good degree, did a couple of internships in traditional finance, and then thought I was completely breaking the mold and ended up working in fintech startups instead. I was like, how out there am I, breaking the mold entirely, not working for, I did internship and got offered a grad scheme at Lloyd's banking group, and I turned it down. I was like, I am a rebel. I am a rebel, and I'm going to go and work in fintech startups just to feel like I'm using my degree and
Mm.
using the quote unquote skills that I've developed. Um, but yeah, I was definitely destined for a career in finance originally.
And how far did you go down the fintech path?
So I stayed in, well, I started in fintech. I was there for a couple of years. Then I sort of stayed in tech startups. So I sort of bopped around and moved around a few different tech startups. And then my last full-time job was back in fintech. So sort of stayed loosely connected to it, but very, very loose. And I think increasingly over probably 5 or 6 years of that career, just lost any real interest in the subject matter of financial services, if it was ever there to begin with. I think I did a good job
Mm.
of kind of trying to immerse myself in it and get somewhat excited by it, and challenger banks and digital transformation. But yeah, I think it wasn't really what was connected to me and what I saw myself doing longer term.
It's good that you tried though, in a sense, in that there's a lot of people who say, find out what you love and then make it a career.
Mm,
And I've read a lot of prominent psychologists and career advisors who say, that's quite naive. And actually, what you should try and do is find something that you can kind of, to some degree, tolerate, seem to be competent at, and turn it into something you love.
mm,
And that is a nice way to do it. 'Cause, if you ask someone who's surfing on the beach, what career do you want? They want, I want a career, and I won't tolerate for anything less where I can work near a beach, get paid six figures, can surf three times a day. It's like, well, yes, that is a dream setup, but you don't get that straight. You don't get that straight away. You have to
mm.
do the things that are hard and turn that into something you love a little bit first. So at least you tried, it sounds like, to turn it into something you
Yeah,
love.
I'd say so. I'm intrigued maybe to get your take on this as well, because I think gone a bit of an evolution of how I feel towards this like fetishization of ikigai and doing what you love and
Mm.
making a career out of your passion. It's like find your passion and then turn it into a career, like you're saying. And actually, yes, that's an option and a great option. But I've seen myself go through cycles of this. I've seen other people go through cycles of this where what started as a passion then becomes work. And there are bits of it that just feel like work.
Mm.
And it can take some of the shine off of the original passion. And I think you have to really stay connected to the love of it. Otherwise, it can almost suck some of the love out of it if you spend too much time um, worrying about the work side of it, if that makes sense.
I completely agree. I think we need hobbies. I think in the modern world, like you pick up a camera and someone says to you, okay, what's your Instagram account? Where is it? Where are you doing your next gallery? You start up running or when's a 5K? when you're doing a 10K, everything needs to be like a side hustle.
Mm,
I think it's so important that you have things that you do for their intrinsic value. You do
yeah.
them just because you enjoy them. And undoubtedly, things like, for me, yoga is very much work. It's a big part of my life, and I still have the practice, but it is work. And it's very hard to separate all the time. If I go to a yoga studio, I'm analyzing their decor, I'm analyzing what the teacher said to cueing, and I can't help that. And there's that layer to it, there's a practical layer, but also we don't need everyone in the world to be a professional breath worker or yoga teacher. We need people that have a breathwork practice, a deep breathwork practice, or a deep yoga practice, and they interact in the world
Hmm.
informed by that. They are lawyers who are informed and affected by their long-term practice. And I think that's how we affect change in the world, is by people still having normal jobs, but they do these wonderful things to just help them live in a more mindful way and interact with the world in a more loving way.
100%. I think that's maybe, it's the binary kind of polarized nature of the world at the moment, right? It's sort of either or. It's either, and it's about identity, right? It's like either you're the lawyer, and if you're a lawyer at a Magic Circle firm, you're not doing yoga, you're not going on a breathwork retreat, um, or you discover breathwork, you fall in love with it, and you sack all of that off to become a breathwork teacher, and you go, well, it has to be either or, rather than, as you said, you can have the breathwork practitioner who can um, exist in the world and talk to the lawyers, and you have the lawyers who love their breathwork practice and benefit from it and are able to subtly almost bring that into their field of operating. Because I think it's just all this kind
Mm.
of separation mindset where we go, okay, you're over here and you're over here, and you guys can't interact or intersect because there's a clash there, or a perceived
You're
clash.
you're not my tribe.
Yeah,
I need
find
I
your
need I need
tribe.
people that are love and light.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
I think we need to be exposed to people that are different to us and have different hobbies and the like. But do you think the industry, when I say industry, whether it be any kind of wellness training, is sometimes guilty of encouraging that, and encouraging people to like change your career, start a new career, do this training, change your life, do this training. For a lot of people and a lot of studios, teacher trainings are the biggest source of income or one of the big ones. But I've been so insistent that on our 200-hour training at Try Yoga, we're not using that messaging of
Mhm.
come to this to change your life or come to this to start a new career. Because to be honest, I don't think people should. Just because you like yoga doesn't mean you'll even enjoy being a yoga teacher at all. It means that you like the practice of yoga.
Yeah.
I didn't intend to be a yoga teacher. It just so happened that I liked teaching it and seemed to be half competent and had a bit of a niche at the time
Mm.
as an athletic young guy teaching yoga, which is definitely not a niche anymore. I'm not neither athletic nor young anymore. So at what point did the shift happen for you? Like, 'cause I know you've done multiple of good breath work training. You've done like Oxygen Advantage, XBT, conscious breath stuff. At what point was there a shift to, okay, this is a part of my life, to maybe this is going to be something I want to share on a more commercial basis and it be my career?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I definitely see, and maybe we can come back to the conversation around teacher trainings as well, because certainly in the breathwork world, there's the arrival of the opportunists, and because there is huge demand for teacher trainings and people having these amazing experiences and going, right, this is the thing that's going to change my life, rather than just actually allowing it to be a really nice part of their life that enhances it. But for me, I first discovered breathwork about, I'd say I think just over 7 years ago with Richie Bostock. He was my first kind of toe in the water of breath work. And it was at a period of time in my life where I was in a particularly challenging spot. I was in a real dark place. I was working at a startup and kind of running a sales team there, and just really blighted by the pace and the anxiety and the intensity of that, and feeling also at that time really disconnected from any kind of joy or sort of spark in my life. I think I was living a life that I felt I should be living. I was
Mm.
still, although I'd escaped that kind of corporate finance piece, I had gone on to a slightly different defined track of a similar nature. And I just felt increasingly disconnected from myself. And once I sort of found breath work and really started immersing myself in the practice, I was having panic attacks at the time. And it was really the central, I suppose, the central key to coming out of what was a very challenging period of my life. And I'm very aware of how familiar that story is as well, because I see it in people that I work with. I see it in people, time and time again. There's usually, when it comes to this stuff, a level of personal story, personal journey, personal growth that's come with it. And I spent the next couple of years really just making it exactly what we've talked about. It was a part of my life. It was a personal practice. It was something that gave me a huge amount and opened my eyes up to a different experience of life and a different experience of the world around me. And certainly, I think when I was much, much younger, I had a degree of spirituality and a degree of open-mindedness. I think over my late teens and early 20s, that had been mostly by myself beaten out of me. And that really was incredibly impactful. And I remember sitting down with Richie. I had one particular session about, I think, 12 to 18 months into my breathwork sort of journey as a participant. And I said, I want to teach. What do I do? Where do I go? And I remember being incredibly disappointed with Richie's response, because he just said, keep exploring, try different modalities, try different practitioners, make sure it's the right thing and make sure it's sticky, because it's been 12 months, 18 months. How do I know that in 6 months time I'm not going to be interested in something else or kind of captivated by something else? And so I did that. I went away and did retreats and traveled and tried a lot of different styles and formulations of breath in all its different forms, and it stuck. I think that was the kind of the litmus test for me. And I realized that I felt, again, probably similar to yourself, at the time coming into the space, it was pretty nascent. It was pretty new still, about 5 years ago. And I also felt like the historic kind of market landscape for breathwork was slightly older, kind of masters who have been around for 30, 40, 50 years in the space. And I felt like there was and I didn't see it like this at the time. It's more kind of retrospective, sort of seeing a gap and going, there's space here for someone to talk about it in a way that perhaps is more relatable, more accessible to people like me. And that was always my first piece, was like, how can I appeal to a skeptical young guy who isn't really that in tune with his emotions, who is struggling, who is battling anxiety? How can I actually go, no, I was like you. I get the skepticism, I get the resistance, I get the hesitation, but get in the room, give it a go. Because that was the encouragement I got. Was I turned it down, the invitation to a breathwork class, a number of times, because I was like, nah, not for me, not interested, too out there. I'm doing yoga, I've got a yoga practice, but breathwork, step too far. And once I got in the room, that was it was the starting point where I was like, right, okay, we're on to something here on a personal level. And that just grew into something that has become what it's now become. And looking back, it's felt very much like a pull, like it's just sort of unfolded and continues to unfold. And really, I can't see my life having gone in any other direction, really.
Wonderful story. And what good advice Richie gave you to actually
Yeah.
see if it's, because I can only speak really from the yoga context, is people jump into trainings very quickly. Sometimes, what they really want is a holiday in Bali, and training is an excuse to go there for an extended period of time. Or people who've never been to a yoga workshop, never really tried to deepen their knowledge, going from a few classes over the course of a year to wanting to become teacher. I think it's so important you research the method, you find teachers that resonate with you. And I like what you said about the lots of like not old, but like old hippie-ish people were the people doing breathwork 7 years ago, or pranayama.
Mm.
I remember there used to be one in Indaba. I don't know the guy's name. I'm sure it was wonderful, but God, this would have been 8 years ago.
It's
Well, I was
probably,
teaching there, and I was quite hippie. I had long hair, mala beads, and and even it was even the posters were just too out there for me. It was a guy wearing white on a white background, and I was like, no, that's too much. That's too much. And the other thing you said that I really, really resonated with is appealing to your former self. That's like marketing 101 when you're trying to find your messaging. Like, speak to yourself 7 years ago. Is there any
mm.
doubt of where to go or who you're trying to appeal to in whatever sector you're in? Speak to yourself 7, 8, 10 years ago and try and help them.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I think that's stuck with me. It was unintentional to begin with, and I think just happened quite naturally, and then became more intentional. I was like, okay, what is my, if we, what is my USP? What is my messaging? Why are people resonating? Because at the beginning, people were just resonating, and I was like, great, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing without too much thought. And then I started going almost reverse engineering it and going, okay, what's working here? What's landing? Why do people like listening to me talk about this stuff, or why do they like practicing with me, or whatever it might be? And similar threads and themes came out. It was always kind of a mirror of where I was in years gone by.
Mm. Yeah, when people always look for someone to some degree who is like them, don't they? Someone they can resonate with, for better or worse. Having
Yeah.
someone who is like you in some sense makes it a little bit easier. And of course, there's some people that want the exotic, some people that want someone who is entirely not like them at all. But for maybe the more analytical crowd, they
Mm.
want like regularity. And a lot of my friends are lawyers, uh, and all have gone down that sector. And my style resonates with them to some degree because I'm influenced by the legal world. I'm influenced by that way of thinking, and I teach in that way. And then, so you did. What was your first training that you did?
So first one I did was really, again, I guess a bit of a litmus test. It was just purely online self-paced kind of certification. Did it over
Okay.
a course of a week, I think, in back end of 2019 with XPT, and it was very much nuts and bolts of what I would now view as kind of breathwork fundamentals, going a bit of performance stuff, a bit of respiratory physiology, a bit of nervous system regulation stuff, but nothing too kind of out there. It was really just the nailing the basics and nailing the fundamentals. And then beyond that, I went and trained with Alan Dolan, who I imagine was probably the guy at Indaba at the time, because he still comes back over and does his
Maybe.
workshops at Indaba, and he's been in the game for a very long time. And that was a conscious connected breathwork, sort of more therapeutic, healing informed style of breathwork, and that was a much longer undertaking. So that was 6 months part time with a couple of week-long intensives and online bits in the middle and lots of case studies. And that's, I suppose, the main kind of foundation of my training. And then did the stuff with the Oxygen Advantage probably a year after that. And then my most recent one with the breath science certification that I did last year. So yeah, kind of a few different, I guess, different ways into the world of breath, but all sort of connected around that central tenet.
And do you tend to merge them together? Because or maybe you could explain the difference. There's so much out there. There's Oxygen Advantage,
Mm.
there's, the XBT one I've seen. There's a more kind of ones that are designed to create more of like a euphoric state, like ayahuasca, slightly, aren't they?
Mhm.
That kind of vibe. And there's a few other ones out there. There's a guy called Anastasis and Peter McEwen. What are they? Are they Oxygen Advantage? No,
Oxygen
they're
Advantage guys, yeah, yeah, they're away, yeah.
yeah. There's another big one. I forget its name. But anyway, there's lots out there. So what have you created your own thing? Are you merging them together? Do you have a bias towards one over the other?
So I sort of view myself as master generalist is kind of the approach that I take. I there's a lot even within breathwork. There's a lot of kind of we're right, you're wrong. You should only be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. And I go, there's a place for all of this stuff. Otherwise, they wouldn't really be able to do what they're doing. So why do we need to pick and choose? And so the way that I've, I suppose, aggregated my trainings and my knowledge to formulate a bit of an approach is through three, I guess, three pillars of a broader spectrum. So pillar number one being functional breathing, which is oxygen advantage, biomechanics, and biochemistry of breathing. How are you breathing naturally day to day? What is your relationship with oxygen and carbon dioxide, diaphragm, belly, nose, mouth, all of the stuff we hear about from like a how are you breathing perspective. And that's sort of the first rung. And then second piece is the nervous system regulation. So your box breathing, your extended exhale breathing, your even some pranayama really kind of sits in this realm around how can we use simple breathing techniques to create quite impactful shifts in the nervous system. And then third pillar being conscious connected breathing, the more, I guess, the realm of things like holotropic breathing, the more kind of out of body transcendent transformative cathartic experiences. And so I very much kind of set it out like that so that I can, in a one-to-one setting at least, and often in groups where I can have a conversation with somebody and go, what's going on? Why are you here? What are you hoping to get out of this? And from that bucket of kind of different pillars and pools, what can we pull on to give this person the best possible chance of, feeling the way that they want to feel, experiencing life the way they want to experience it, and not trying to, I suppose, fit them into a predefined bucket of functional breathing or nervous system or conscious connected breathing. So allowing the tools to mold to the individual rather than molding the individual to the tools.
And is there anything you wouldn't do for a beginner? Because I've known various yoga teachers, very experienced teachers of pranayama, that had a really strong view that it's just not for a public class. Like the basic level might be like in the yoga context, an ujjayi breath or like is fine, but any more advanced pranayama is not for random drop-in classes. It's for people that are on that journey. Would you share similar thoughts, or are there styles that are more advanced that you wouldn't let a beginner come to?
This is where I sort of again try and strike a bit of a balance, because there are certain modalities that you probably wouldn't just throw out there to a complete random spattering of people with no context of where they've come from and what they're experiencing. That being said, one of the things that I think is incredibly powerful about breathwork is the mass accessibility of it. So it's the ebb and the flow, right? Because it's like at one hand it is just breathing, and that's often a criticism, but at the same time it's just breathing, and so we can all kind of tap into it in different ways. Where I would personally draw lines would just be, there are clear and obvious medical contraindications for certain techniques, particularly the more active, upregulating and tense practices, be that something, like a power breathing or a Wim Hof breathing, or something a little bit more therapeutic like conscious connected breathing and holotropic breathing. That being said, one of the things that I love doing is introducing new people to those deeper modalities of breathwork. And so as long as, for me, I have a level of comfort and context for these individuals, I know that they're not working with any pre-existing medical conditions, potentially psychological conditions, and that they are fully aware, and I think this is where the breathwork space sometimes goes wrong, they are fully aware what they're about to do and where that can go, then I'm pretty comfortable that we can all benefit from, the majority of these practices. So just safety and responsibility, but largely speaking, I'd say most people can tap into all of the kind of full spectrum of different tools and techniques.
And have you encountered many people that have had in their physiology issues that have arisen, as in not problems caused by breathwork, but issues that breathwork has revealed? Like from a very selfish level, I'm always interested in nostrils, because I've got a boxing background. My nose is a bit weird anyway, in that I can just do that and it becomes mush. And I've always felt like there is an inherent physical restriction in my nostrils, and I've never had it looked at. Probably should at some point. But what percentage of people would you say, or to what degree have you encountered people that have had physiological issues with their breath rather than it just be technique?
It's a really good question. I think the biggest one that shows up from a breath, kind of a functional breath and just day-to-day breathing standpoint, is some form of deviated septum or some form of, legacy issue with their nose that is physiologically and sort of mechanically impacting how they breathe. There'll be people that will say, okay, you can remedy that through the breath. I've seen it, but I've also seen it not work. If we've got a purely mechanical issue that's stopping somebody breathing, through their left nostril, for example, then I'm not that certain that I'm going to be able to have an impact on that. I might be able to do things with their breathing biochemistry and working with how they breathe into their diaphragm and working with their relationship with carbon dioxide that would make nasal breathing, in this case, easier and more tolerable. But I'm not going to be able to fix a physiologically deviated septum through teaching someone how to breathe. So it's honestly not something that shows up a huge amount. I say I more frequently get met by people who struggle with allergies, congestion, slightly more temporary and transient blockers. But when it comes to breathing, the nose is often kind of described as a use it or lose it organ facility. So the more we can get people comfortable with nasal breathing, with breathing functionally, with breathing more slowly, breathing more gently, because the vast majority of us are what we call kind of over breathing and breathing beyond our body's requirements in terms of speed, depth, and volume. The more we can remedy that, the more these things start to ease and ebb away anyway. So yeah, I think from a very fundamental standpoint, it doesn't show up a huge amount, but yeah, there are always those edge cases and those ones that, there's only so much that we can do.
And I guess it's hard, if you're working with groups, even on a more intimate level, it's hard to work out what that limiting factor is and get to the point where you think it's deviated septum,
Mm.
and then how do you even then do you get a magnifying glass out and then start looking up their nose? Much like with yoga, if someone can't do Hanumanasana splits, I'm not immediately assuming they've got a massive femur head and a very small acetabular. That's not my go-to assumption. My assumption is always, and probably would be for about 6-7 years of trying, they're just fairly tight in certain areas of the hips. But actually, it could be skeletal,
Mm.
but it wouldn't be the immediate assumption. There's lots of devices out there now that I don't know what breath workers think of it. I imagine breath workers might think of these in the same way as a masseuse might think about a Theragun. In that, I got given one years ago called the Aerofit. And I'm
Mm.
sure it's wonderful. I used it a little bit, but then it was just another device to charge and another thing on my phone and another reason to open my phone. So I kind of stopped using it. And there's a famous UFC fighter called Baz Rutten who made one as well. A similar kind of a device that you breathe into and there's restriction. And I remember back in the day when I was boxing, and I haven't seen these for years, I think they've gone way out of fashion. People used to wear masks that were meant to stimulate altitude, which of course didn't really stimulate altitude. It was just restricted oxygen. There was no other effect of altitude. It was just a mask, and they looked horrific. And I almost bought one, but didn't go down that route. What are your thoughts on these kind of gadgets that one might use? Are they worth it? And actually, can they actually cause more harm than good when a lot of what we clearly need to do is just sit down with our own body and breathe?
Yes, and both. I think it's sort of a case of, I have one of the masks. They're still around. They're
Are
still
they
very much there. They're still very much alive and
the
kicking.
kind of one you'd wear
Um,
to a riot?
yeah, it looks
They look
like
kind of
sort
like
of Bane from
yeah.
The Dark Knight, that sort of vibe. So there's a whole variety of breath related, technologies and bits of kit, of which I have a few, mainly out of curiosity. I think for 90% of the people, and I'm probably conservative with that 90%, there's absolutely no need. The low hanging fruit and the 90% of the benefit comes from having a consistent daily practice of working with your nervous system and your breath, moving towards a more overall optimal functional breathing pattern, and maybe occasionally diving deep into a therapeutic session to dig into some of the stuff that you're holding on to. That would be sort of where I would start anybody. None of my one-to-one clients are using, kit. They're not using the masks. The masks and I suppose more on the performance side of things, that's where we might get a little bit more creative if we're thinking, combat sports, if we're thinking just elite sport in general, where we're looking at the 1%, 2% changes, we might push into that. However, I even see it like I guess the most rudimentary breathing apparatus from a kit perspective would be mouth tape, right? And
Mm.
people are going, okay, I'm going to tape my mouth shut while I go for a run. My view on that is just keep your mouth closed. You don't need to tape your mouth
But people
unless you
need to
have.
know that people need to know that. People need to know that
Well,
you are taping your
exactly,
mouth.
exactly, and the nasal strips that a lot of people are wearing now as well. I The other side of this is going, if people are paying more attention to their breath because they're mouth taping,
Mm.
what during their run, because they've got this mask, because they've got an aero fit, that's also really good. And I actually can't knock it in terms of bringing awareness to the category of breath. Do I think it's going to change somebody's life? Not necessarily directly, but indirectly as a result of them paying more attention to their breath. Over time, they will see, hopefully, their life change in a positive way. So, you know, there's a time and a place, I think, every now and then for kind of those fringe, 1%, 2% benefits. But for the mass market, we don't need them.
I did try those nasal strips briefly because I started snoring And every time I woke up in the night, my wife wasn't there. She'd gone to the spare, she'd gone to the spare bedroom, and I didn't like that. It
It's
also meant,
much kinder than Abby. She wakes me up to let me know I'm snoring, and then puts me on my side, and then we go back to sleep. She doesn't leave. She just wakes me up.
okay, so as a breathwork practitioner and expert, you snore.
I know,
And
cancel me.
what do you put that down to?
So it happens when I'm on my back,
Okay.
and it's not kind of a traditional snore. It's more of just a kind of a heavy mouth breath more than anything, which again is cancelable offence as a breathwork practitioner.
Hmm.
Um, for me, I put that down to a very mild form of obstructive sleep apnea, which is
Mm.
just from chin sinking down slightly, airways getting slightly blocked, and that um, restriction of airflow, creating that kind of juddering of the breath. Um, there are ways that I work around that and work to remedy that, but it usually peaks with stress. To be totally honest,
Mm.
when I'm particularly stressed, which again, who'd have thought I get stressed? That's when it typically rises, and I see that with a lot of my clients as well. When stress is high and you're fit and healthy more generally, then sleep apnea can start to show up, particularly in men as well.
Transformational experiences now. And I think in one of
Ooh,
your pinned social media posts, you talked about things that helped you 6, 7 years ago and you had that period of depression. And one of the things was transformational experiences. And I'd love to talk to that because much like some people love to buy a gadget and think that's a work. And I think we're all guilty of that. If I buy some trainers, that's the equivalent of me running a few marathons. Just the act of buying trainers. And of course, it's not. But people inevitably want a quick fix of whatever that might be, whether that be buying something or doing something. Uh, I read a statistic that I think online courses that are pre-recorded, something like 95% are never completed. It's absolutely obscene. When it comes to transformational experiences, I think often people want the same sometimes. They don't want to do the long-term consistent work, like
mhm.
breath work every day for 10 minutes. What they want is to go away for 2 weeks to Bali or like, I always pick on Bali. I don't know what big, it could be anywhere. Do a single ayahuasca session and come back a changed person. Uh, so when you talk about transformational experiences, I just love you to speak to that balance between having them and how to facilitate them, but then also not relying on that quick fix.
Yeah, yeah. It's honestly a conversation I have with myself quite frequently of like, am I kidding myself into thinking these experiences are valuable to avoid doing the graft of the daily work and the micro work? And I suppose my approach and my feelings towards that right now are that um, what I see in the world and through the lens of my clients and people that I know is that we as a society are very um, now I feel very well versed in the micro. It's the nutrition, it's the daily exercise, it's the therapy, it's the self-awareness, it's the books, it's the podcasts, it's the information, it's the micro day-to-day habits. They might not be perfect for everybody, but we pay attention to them and we have that conversation. And I know so many people that are just really, pretty well regulated. They look after themselves. They are, compared to a large portion of the population, healthy, and they are miserable. They
Mm.
are lost. They are stuck. And that to me, I was looking at that going, what's going on here? And savior complex, how can I help? How can my work inform supporting these people beyond just giving them more things to do on a day-to-day basis? And I was going, okay, well, we've got at one end of this spectrum, we've got the daily practices and we've got the functional breathing. But then at the other end, I know firsthand and I see time and time again the power of breathwork to create these big transcendent transformative experiences. And where does that fit into the puzzle in a way that isn't escapist, that in a way that isn't um, bypassing the day to day? And the thing that seemed to connect all of those experiences was connection to meaning and connection to something outside of the four walls of our own kind of skull and psyche. And that for me is the place for these experiences. And these experiences, if strip it back to basics, could be through deeper forms of breath work, could be through psychedelics and plant medicine, but also could be through ecstatic dance, could be through community, could be through a really deep, impactful conversation, could be seeing a sunset at the top of a mountain. It doesn't have to be, you know, plant medicine induced hallucinations, but it certainly can be. And so we've seen this renaissance of altered states of consciousness for healing. But the key piece of that puzzle, I think, is not falling into self-delusion and not falling into convincing yourself that the experience alone will do the heavy lifting for you. And this real emphasis on integration, which is, how do I take the insights? How do I take the information, what I've seen, what I've learned, what I feel more than anything? I think it's felt sense more than anything else, and make that stick and make that last. And I think there is a level of kind of, we kid ourselves because we go, right, I've done it and I've felt it and now that'll stick. But it's almost using those experiences to lift yourself out of a funk or a rut, or give yourself some level of insight that allows you to make those better informed, healthier choices in the day to day. So we can kind of meet in the middle of like day to day micro habits and discipline, and then macro kind of surrender and peace and meaning. Because I think the micro emphasis and our obsession in the detail of the day to day and with discipline is very restrictive and very separating and very kind of individualistic. And I think we need these transformational experiences, often in community, to connect us back to that meaning and that connection to ourselves, but that connection to others as well. So yeah, I guess that's my take on
They can
the
kind of
place that
act
they
like a
hold.
hard reset almost.
I'd say so, like a polishing of the lens through which you view the world around you. I think the times I struggle the most to this day are the times where I am bogged down in the day to day, and I'm seeing is the 6 inches in front of my face. I'm seeing the to-do list. I'm seeing the grind. I'm seeing everything that's wrong with the world. And I've lost any sense of connection to something bigger than myself. And I'm just like locked into this blinkered version of my own reality. And sometimes it takes a bigger experience to pull me out of that. Sometimes it just takes a hug from my partner. But other times when I'm a little bit, potentially deeper in that place of feeling quite blinkered, it can take something a bit bigger and a bit more impactful to lift us out of that.
I would love to share something that's helped me lately. And I haven't had big dramatic experiences for a long time. Like, I think, well, having a child is a big one.
Yeah.
Actually, to be fair, actually. But like a reset, because I think some of these resets can be quite small. But I just did a little reset on my phone 2 weeks ago. I love reading. I've always loved reading. But sometimes again, it's just another device that goes in my bag and I forget it. I use Kindle solely because if I use books, number one, I ruin them, and number two, I love to have highlights. I like to highlight things, and if I highlight a physical book, that never gets seen again. It's useless. Uh, and a few weeks ago, I sat down and I just found myself procrastinating a little bit too much. And I found Twitter being so toxic, where I use it a lot. And just to reframe my relationship with device, moved everything onto my iPad, except Instagram, because I kind of do need that a little bit more regularly, and I don't tend to procrastinate on Instagram. And so all Twitter, blah blah blah, YouTube, all went onto my iPad. And of course, I'm not going to walk around with my iPad, like if in my hand physically. It's in my bag. It's deep. If I need it, I get it out for a function. I don't dwell on it. And then replaced in my pocket with my Kindle. And immediately, my whole world. Oh, look at that sweaty armpit, bloody hell. My whole world felt completely reframed because finally, again, I was getting this input from interesting people through books, through fiction, through non-fiction. I was meeting other people in different worlds through amazing fiction. And then I instead on my device, my main device, installed like one app just to shout out this app. Let me get its name up. Called Readwise. And what it does is you can synchronize it with multiple things, including Kindle, and each day it shares with you 5 things you've highlighted. And
That's
for
great.
me, there's thousands of books, literally thousands that I've highlighted stuff in. And then it takes you back to that place where you read something and it meant something to you, and you get 5 of those a day. And that has had a dramatic impact on me the last few weeks. Not that I was in a particular state or like, but there's little things you can do to to reset, or as you say, polish a glass on your world. And I think, yoga retreats are wonderful, providing you don't go with a view of escaping life,
Yeah.
but using it as a pause, like a place to breathe, where you can then actually just work out how you want to live. But I think it's so important for people when they go on these experiences, which are often in beautiful places, they don't replace, like, think that is living. And that becomes me on that beach, that's truly living. Anything else isn't living. And I
Well,
think
that's
that's
it, right?
sometimes a danger.
Well, that's it. I think it comes back to what we were saying about, teacher trainings and people wanting to become, a yoga teacher or a breathwork teacher, because we have that experience and we go, that's how I want my life to be. That's going to be the thing. And we think in doing so, all of the other stuff just disappears and fades away. All the troubles, all the struggles, they just go away. And I do think it often is the case that I always say this to my retreat groups at the end of a retreat. It's like, how can you hold on to some of these feelings? And I don't know if, have you seen the Disney film Soul?
I have, yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Oh, I've seen that film so many times. And the message of that film gets me every time. And I always forget. I'm watching it. I'm like, yeah, this is fun. Like, this is a nice film. It makes me feel good. And then it gets to the end and it just slaps me around the face of this guy realizing that he was never looking for a singular purpose. He was looking for his spark and things in his life that light him up to enjoy the mundane and the stuff that previously he just took for granted. And that's the thing for me that I think I've realized over the last few years doing what I do now as a career is breathwork is something in my life that gives me that sense of spark, and it gives me that sense of meaning. But there are other things too. And it doesn't have to be like we were saying about hobbies as well. It's like, what are the things in your life that give you that sense of spark, and not confusing one individual thing that does that as your sole purpose, and
Mm.
actually going, how can I build a really nice, fulfilled life where I can actually enjoy the mundane, I can enjoy the everyday, because I've got a very full and rich life, rather than putting all my chips on the one thing. Because what if the one thing in a couple of years, taking Richie's advice again from back in the day, what if in 6 months there's that thing, the rug gets pulled and it's no longer the thing? And I
Mm.
think the same with experiences and transformational retreats and all of these things is actually, how do we use them to elevate our day to day and come back and return to a higher plateau? It's not about completely overhauling everything, because we all have that capacity to feel the spark and feel the passion, feel the meaning in everything that we do. It might just be that we've not got enough of those things happening in our lives right now. And how can we connect back to that? And it's not so much connecting you to a new way of living, but perhaps connecting you to an old way of feeling that you've forgotten. And,
Mm.
to your example, stepping off of autopilot and doing something subtly different. Because I think the problem that a lot of people face right now is this sense of autopilot. Everything's just rolling. We're just kind of on this escalator and we're not quite sure how to get off. And sometimes those hard resets are the thing that we need, just as a bit of a reminder that we do have more of a say as well.
Slightly shifting gear,
Mm.
I'd love to talk about, you are successful at what you do now, and you've got a wonderful website, branding. You've got amazing testimonials on your website from people that many people would know, like Ella Mills and alike. What skills or experience did you use to build the business you have? Because a lot of people, and I do like mentor programs alike to help people find this, and I feel quite lucky that I had skills from both law and then the career that followed it, which is kind of non-profit management, which generally means in non-profit you do everything.
Mm.
Learn how to do marketing and like I use them then in my yoga teaching career. So I guess, where did you get those skills from? And how much support did you have in terms of developing what you have in terms of website and the like? Uh, and have you always been quite strategic in the implementation of it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think I really rejected my old self when I went on this kind of journey into doing what I do now. I was like, I was never a salesperson. I was never a business person. I was never an entrepreneur. I was never this. I was never that. And pushed all that down and pushed it away and sort of cast it out. And then I look back now and I'm, have a better relationship with my past. And I go, oh, yeah, the same thing that made me good at that also has made me good at what I do now, and reintegrating some of those parts. And yeah, I'd say really interestingly, probably lost touch with it when I was about 15, but certainly growing up, I had a fascination with psychology and with the human mind. And I think that is what I've reconnected to most strongly through my work. Is like I just love thinking about what makes people tick, and human behavior and human nature. And I think a lot of my work really comes back to that. As you know, why are we feeling what we're feeling, and how can we build a life that feels differently if we want to? And so I think that's been kind of an underlying theme for me. But in terms of how I built things and the skills that I feel have served me well, um, I'm not a technical person. I had a friend of mine build a website for me, help with the branding and kind of flesh out that side of things. I think my strength lies in brand kind of vision, brand architecture, brand articulation. I think that's probably what I view as one of my key strengths, is the ability to articulate ideas and concepts, and put them into ways that are accessible for people. And I think that's been really a powerful piece of what I do, because I love making this work accessible, and I also feel fortunate that that sits in my wheelhouse as far as things that I'm naturally quite good at. Strategy wise, and I think I maybe alluded to this a little bit earlier, it all felt probably for the first couple of years that everything was just kind of happening. I wasn't making any really kind of strategic decisions. I was excitable. I was driven. I was, yeah, just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what might stick. And then since, I suppose, that kind of 2-year honeymoon period, it's certainly been more strategic, and it's actually going, oh, why did that work? Why did that land in the way it landed? What do people like about this? Why is it sticking? And making much more sort of informed strategic decisions from there to actually go, what do I enjoy? What resonates with people? Where's the kind of sweet spot between those two? And how to build that in a kind of more effective way. Really, I guess, interestingly, it's been probably 4.5, 5 years now of business, and I've just brought somebody in to support on operations and growth. So kind of a bit of a step towards building probably a slightly more professional business, and leveling things up a little bit, which is exciting and daunting in equal measure, because I've built quite a successful sort of shit show behind the scenes. It's kind of a real melee of just stuff that has been around with me for a very long time and sort of taken form. And I'd say probably that one of the things that, again, happened initially just, I think, naturally, but then has been a really key part of the growth of things, has been the network and the connections and the collaborations. I think the people that I've met, the connections that I've made, the relationships that I've formed through my work, and I think mostly driven by just passion, shared passion. I look at the brands that I work with, I look at the people that I love collaborating with, and we're all trying to achieve similar things just through different vehicles. And that has been a big part of kind of how things have grown over time. And I think there's probably a vulnerable kind of honest undercurrent of, yeah, I do think I'm still trying to prove something to somebody, and prove that I'm good, and prove that I'm worthy. And I feel somewhat fortunate that also drives me to put stuff out into the world. And I've always, again, I guess, kind of from a more vulnerable perspective, I've always struggled with insecurities, I'd say, and that sense of maybe not feeling good enough. But at the same time, particularly when I'm passionate about something, I don't hold a huge amount of fear about putting stuff out into the world. I might not like it if it doesn't land well, because it kind of reinforces that belief that perhaps I'm not good enough. But to get it out into the world, I don't have a huge amount of fear. And I think that as well, I've put out loads of things in the past that haven't landed or haven't done what I hoped they would. And we move on. We learn from it and we move on. And that doesn't stick around for too long. So I think just, yeah, the community piece, the networking piece, the collaborative piece, along with, I suppose, clear vision and articulation of concepts, kind of driven by that underlying motivating kind of factor of maybe trying to prove something to somebody along the way.
And then quick fires now.
Let's
Little
do
quick
it.
fires. So it's not a quick question, but give a quickish answer. When you teach breath work in corporate settings, I'm sure some people are quite awkward about like doing breath work in front of their manager or like make a noise. How would you alleviate those concerns?
Putting myself in their shoes, letting them know that I used to be one of them, and leaning on research to kind of allay any skepticism. Going, I know you think this might be a little bit woo-woo, but here's what the research says, and that tends to ease people a little bit into going, okay, I'll give this a go.
Is there any like breathwork technique, like a guided one that is that someone new to it could try that might actually have quite a strong effect on them that maybe you've put out there for free somewhere that they could find, or a technique that they could Google?
I'd encourage people to lean towards anything kind of nervous system down regulating. So there's an NSDR sort of non-sleep deep rest practice on my YouTube. There's also a 5-minute practice called 20 breaths to calm, which is a mixture of 2 different calming breathwork techniques that I think most people would benefit from.
And what has been a kind of a transformational experience that you've had lately? Lately can be the last few years, but any particular moment?
One that stands out to me was a men's retreat, Men Without Masks, amazing organization. That was about probably 2 years ago now. I'd just come out of a relationship, and yeah, it was just such a powerful, genuinely transformative experience. And I would say there's another which is more kind of day to day, but my partner and I have been together now for a year and a half, and she has a little girl who's 6, and becoming a sort of quasi parent has been, you know, transformative in ways that I never thought possible. So
Nice. And then finally, what would you like to do more of in your life? If you had more time or space, what would you be doing more of?
working with schools and children, I think that would be high on the list.
And anything personally
Um, Surfing,
or surfing?
yeah, more surfing.
Not great in London and Surrey.
Yeah, it's not the best place for it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And no, just let us know where people can find you.
Yeah, so everything is under the breath space, breath without an E on the end. Thebreathspace.co.uk and at the underscore breath underscore space on Instagram and socials.
And you've got a course coming up soon, haven't you? And when's that
Yes,
start and what is that?
January. So it's called Breathwork Mastery with a good friend of mine, James Dowler. 5-week live online course that spans really everything that we've touched on in terms of the day to day, but also those deeper experiences through breathwork, part theoretical and educational, but also very experiential as well. And our kind of mission through that is to sort of call BS a little bit on the wild west of breathwork and curb some of the misinformation that's out there.
Oh, thanks so much.
Honestly unbalanced.